today's video. If you have watched any of my board game videos at all, you probably know there is one board game that I always mention because I'm kind of obsessed with, and that board game is Hero Realms. Oh my goodness, I absolutely adore this deck building fantasy themed card game. It is, when I say obsessed with it, my partner and I, for the last year and a half, maybe 2 years since we've had it, have played this game nearly every single day. And I am not yet bored of it. So today I'm going to be ranking all the Hero Realms cards from best to worst, and I am so excited to take you on that journey with me and hear your thoughts. Do you agree with me? What are your thoughts on certain cards? Do you think my one choice of card which you should never buy is correct? Or would you actually say, no, this card has some utility that after maybe 1,000 games I am yet to notice? Anyway, shall we delve into this exciting Hero Realms themed video? Hero Realms is a deck building game for 2 to 4 players, and you're basically trying to get the best hand possible by buying cards from the marketplace in order to get your opponent down to 0 hit points and basically be the Hero Realms master / champion / genius. There are 4 different colours of card. You've got your gold cards, which are very much focused on healing. Your blue cards, which give you a little bit more kind of flexibility with your deck and also allow you to stun opponents' champions. The greens, which very annoyingly can make your opponent discard a card or multiple cards. A recent game. And then there are the reds, which I think have one of the most powerful abilities in the game, which is the ability to sacrifice cards from your deck and basically slim your deck, refine your deck, make it as powerful as possible and destroy your opponent. So there are 5 different tiers in which to rank the Hero Realms cards. The first is God tier. These are the cards which are phenomenal and almost always guarantee you winning the game if you have them. Next up, I've got the Game Changers. Those are those cards that you should definitely always buy and could really help you flip from potentially being in a not so good position to a far better one. You've then got the Reliable lot, so the cards that I would always consider buying and can really help you build a strong and effective deck. This is going to be followed by the Meh cards. The cards that sometimes have promise, especially when they've got synergy, but are either overpriced for what they do or just don't really add much to your hand or require very specific requirements to actually be any good. And then I've got the simple one card. Comment below if you think what card this is going to be. And these are cards from the original Hero Realms pack, not any of the expansions. Which card do you think I think is a complete waste? Buying it can actually be detrimental to your hand, so I wouldn't actually touch it with a 10-foot pole. So first up, we have the mighty Arcus the Dragon. Arcus costs 8 to buy, so he's one of the most expensive cards in the game. And he is a phenomenal card to get. For one thing, he is a guard of 6, so he's a bit of a nightmare to get through. Not only that, but he deals 5 points of damage, and without any synergy or anything, he just lets you draw a card, which is fabulous. And of course, if you do get that synergy, you get to heal for an extra 6. He is very difficult to buy early game, but once you've got him, your game is going to run extremely smoothly, especially if you have a very yellow focused deck, because you're basically, for every 5 points of damage you're dealing to your opponent, you're healing for even more than that. So before I carry on, my partner and I have a few homebrew rules. One of them being you can't split damage. So if someone has 2 champions on the field, let's say both are 3, and you have a card which does 7 points of damage, you can only kill 1 champion, which completely changes the dynamic of the game and which I completely love. And I would recommend trying to play it that way, because it just means you need to be a little bit more strategic with how you play, because actually sometimes having lots of small guards can be really, really effective. But anyway, back to the ranking. So the next card, let me describe it to you, and then I want you to guess how much it costs. So this card does 5 points of damage immediately, and then 2 points of additional damage for every single champion you have on the field, regardless of their colour. Slash, if you have synergy, you heal for 6. I have done ridiculous amounts of damage with this card. I mean, if you do have a field of champions, you're in a pretty good position anyway, but I think I've done near 18 points of damage with this card. And it costs 3 coins. This card is definitely a game changer. Wherever you get it in the game, it just pumps out so much damage and it is fantastic. Though, as I said, imagine someone had a champion of 3 on the field and you had to pump 20 points of damage to kill that one tiny champion. But really, the only reason it's not in God tier is it does rely on that champion wall, and it does become very, very strong when you do have a champion wall, and at that point, you're probably going to win anyway. That just, closed ranks just lets you annihilate your opponent in an incredibly satisfying and exciting way. So next up we have Command, and this is a good all-rounder card. It costs 5, which I think is completely fair. It gives you 2 coins in return, lets you do 3 damage, heals for 4, but the icing on the cake is you also get to draw a card from it. So it's not taking any of your deck, and I wouldn't say it's as good as closed ranks because it doesn't have that massive damage output, but early game it's guaranteed getting you a decent amount of money, and I honestly think it can completely change where you're at from a subpar place to a buying all those extremely powerful cards like Arcus. So fabulous card. Next up we have Darian the Warlord. Poor Darian. He costs 4, which is fine. He's a champion. He's not a very hard champion to get through. And the interesting aspect of him is you can either decide to do 3 points of damage to your opponent or heal for 4. I normally choose early game to heal for 4 because if I can get more hit points, that's great, and it heals you more than damage it does to your opponent. So he is fine, but I often don't gravitate towards him, and he's very much reliant on a yellow heavy pack to give synergy to the other good yellow cards to be effective. So despite he looks awesome there, like shooting fire from his hands, I'm just not that fussed. This takes us to the next card, which is Domination, a card of 7, so second most expensive card of the game, therefore very unlikely to get early on, but 6 points of damage, fabulous. 6 healing, also really good, and you draw a card, all sounds great. Then, if you have synergy, you get to prepare another champion. So for example, you could choose to prepare Arcus twice. That means double the damage and double the draw. Game changer. Next up we have Christoph. Christoph is worth the same as Command, so he is a 5, but he is not guaranteed a draw. You need synergy for that draw. He does a little bit of healing, a little bit of damage, and he is a champion of 5. So he is likely to early game to potentially stay on your field for a little while, but it's not guaranteed. And because you don't get that immediate draw, I'm going to put him as a reliable. Christoph, our proud, brave Christoph, is just a reliable fellow, and I would happily buy him for 5 coins. This is followed by Cracker High Priest. I used to worship this priest. I used to think, a fabulous card. He's worth a 6. He guarantees you a draw, gives you 2 healing, and if you have synergy, you get an extra 2 healing for every champion you have, which can be really, really great and effective. And similarly to closed ranks, you can get a hell of a lot of healing. I think I've got nearly in the 20s. I used to be more on the God tier for this because the fact he's a champion of 6 also means he stays on the field. He's not that easy to kill. But if you get him too early game, yes, you can be healing, but he he puts out no damage, and that can be really challenging if you get a very healing focused hand early on, because you'll get to the point where your opponent has enough damage to just get through all that healing. So I've been up in the 90s, 100s. I normally start with 60 hit points, but I've got so much healing, and then my opponent has just taken me down in a couple of goes because of the amount of damage. So I'm really torn, because I do think healing's great, and the draw, because he's guaranteed a draw, which means he's not taking up any space in your hand, I'm going to put him as a game changer. Next up, we have our little man at arms, and I'm actually going to just put him now in the mayor pile, and also put Master Wayne with him in the mayor pile. These cards are both guards of, I think, 3 and 4, and the man at arms costs 3, Wayne costs 4, and they do very similar things, just Wayne is slightly different. They basically do 2 or 3 points of damage, and then an additional point of damage for certain cards you have out. These cards become phenomenal when you have veteran squires. So veteran squires are an expansion from another pack, and I won't go too much into them now, but they really give these kind of small yellow champions a lot more utility and make them a lot more interesting. But on their own, they're really easy to get through. They don't tend to stay on your field very long, and they require you to have a decent kind of champion deck, and they don't excite me. They don't really do much. I'd only get them if I had a strong yellow hand or a lot of champions, but otherwise, yeah, I'm not interested. Next, we have Rally the Troops. So Rally the Troops does a good 5 points of damage to your opponent, which will get through a fair amount of those smaller champions. It also allows you to heal for 5, which is always a nice bonus. And if you have synergy, you get to prepare another champion. So that is always a reliable card to buy, and he only costs 4, which is absolutely fine. And you're very likely to be able to afford him early game. That brings us now to our more money-focused yellow cards. So we've got Recruit, first of all. Costs 2, so unless you're very unlucky, you could probably buy that in your first turn. He gives you 2 yellow coins and 3 healing plus an extra healing point for every champion you have, which can be a nice little easy buff to get. But the great thing about him is if you do get synergy, you get an extra coin. So that's 3 coins, which is incredibly powerful to have one card that gives you 3 coins. Because he only costs 2, I'm always very happy to buy him. I'd easily consider buying him over the other 3 small champions below. And it's just a very reliable, good card to get through money. And when I look at money cards, I always compare them to fire gems, which are your kind of standard cards in the market that are always available to buy. So they give you 2 coins and you can sacrifice them for 3 points of damage. And if a money card can't do better than that, I don't really see the point of buying it, which leads us to the Tithe Priest, the card you've all been waiting for. This card costs 2 coins. Okay, sounds reasonable. This card gives you 1 coin in return, or 1 point of healing for every champion you have on the field. It is itself a champion, so it will stay up on your field, but I think it's a champion of 3 and he'll just get annihilated so quickly, and he's literally just taking up space in your hand. A fire gem would be a better option than this, because you could get 1 coin from your starting pack anyway. The only time you could consider this card being good is if you have a lot of champions, because that means you could get a lot of healing, but that's really only going to happen late game. And why would you want a Tithe Priest late game? Because you're probably already in a good position and going to win, so having the Tithe Priest wouldn't really make a difference. And maybe if you had veteran squires that I talked about, which really benefit from champions in the gold pack, you could consider it. But again, you'd probably do better with a fire gem than this absolutely rubbish card that I think would actually be extremely detrimental to your game if you were to buy. So, message, do not buy the Tithe Priest. This takes us on to taxation. Taxation gives you 2 coins and an extra 6 heal if you've got synergy, which is pretty good. Only costs you 1 coin to buy, so you're actually making money from buying this card. And it's just such a good, reliable card to get early on and help you buy those more expensive cards which are going to change the game. And then that takes us on to the last yellow card, which is Word of Power. Word of Power lets you draw 2 cards. It allows you to heal for 5, and you can sacrifice it to do a big finale kill for another 5 points of damage, which is like a nice added bonus. It costs 6, which if you are very lucky, you can get early on. And because it doesn't do really damage without getting rid of it, I'm going to put him in the game changer areas, but it is a fabulous card. So now we move on to the blues. And first of all, we've got Borg. Borg costs 6. He's also a guard of 6, which is the second highest guard you can get in the game. But he only does 4 points of damage per turn and doesn't really have much more utility than that. The thing that does make him good is lots of the blue cards have really fantastic synergic effects. So if you get him on the board, he's quite hard to kill. And if you've got other blues, that means you can get that added effects when you get them out. I'm very torn. I think he's a very reliable card to have. You can get him first go if he's very lucky, but I would normally choose Word of Power. Maybe I would choose Borg sometimes over Command. Oh, it's hard. I think because he is quite beefy, he can go in the game changers because he can... No. I am going to put him on reliable. He does the damage, he stays where you are, but you are relying on that really good kind of blue deck. He doesn't allow any manipulation or anything, which other cards like Command, which allow you to draw, do. Next up, we have a money card, and Bribe costs 3 and also gives you 3 coins. And 3 coins is a great amount to have in your hand. And his synergy effect is quite cool. He basically allows you to take an action from your discard pile and put it in your deck. However, put it on top of your deck, sorry. However, late game, he can be a bit annoying unless you have a really good green focused deck. So I would say getting this card early on can be really effective and really great with said blue deck, but he's nothing special. Because I think there's other better 3 cards. Yeah, I'm putting Bribe there. Next we have Death Threats, our little assassination card. Death Threat costs 3 coins, so the same as Bribe, but gives you 1 point of damage, it's something, eh? And also allows you to draw a card without having any synergy, which is a really nice aspect to it, because it's basically taking no place at all in your hand. It's just an extra card that does a little bit of damage, and if you have synergy, it allows you to get a stun. A stunning for 3. I think this is the cheapest card that allows you to both stun and draw. And because of how cheap it is, that means you can buy it early game. I'm going to put it in the game changer. Now we have Deception. Deception costs 5, gives you 2 coins, allows you to draw immediately. And if you have synergy, you can immediately buy a card from the market and put it into your hand. And because this card is giving you a lot of money, it gives you the possibility of buying really good cards. The only reason it isn't going in God tier is you need that synergy to have that amazing effect. In one of the expansions, there is a card called Bounty Collector, which I actually have here, which gives you 3 coins and allows you to immediately buy a card and put it into your hand. And if you've got synergy, draw. Like, this card is insane. But Deception is definitely a game-changing card, and only 5, like you'd always buy it. This is supposed to be 7. We charge 8 for it because it's a fabulous, game-changing, godlike card. So next up, we have another card which is going to go into God tier, and that is Firebomb. Also costs 8, so we're talking an expensive card, but it does 8 points of damage. It lets you draw a card and it lets you stun another person's champion. Phenomenal. It isn't a champion itself, so it's a one-off use, it's an action, it's then gone. Well, it's not gone, it's gone back into your deck unless you want to do an additional 5 points of damage, in which case you have to sacrifice the card. But that means in one turn, you can potentially do 13 points of damage just with one card. He is amazing! Next up, we have Hit Job. And Hit Job is one of the Hit Job is one of the few cards which does 7 points of damage plus straight off. And the reason cards that do 7 plus damage are really good is there are a few champions in this game which are guards. There are a few champions in this game of 7, which is the highest kind of shield value you can have. And so the fact that lots of these cards, for example, let me just put this down. For example, you've got Domination here is only a 6. Most cards you won't see going above a 6. So this being a 7 is amazing. And you get a stun if you've got Synergy. And it only costs you 4. Only 4 coins. It's great. Which takes us to another cheapish card of the game. This bad boy is only 2 coins. And it's called Intimidation, and it does 5 points of damage, and if you have Synergy, you get 2 coins. This is just a decent, reliable card to get early on to do some decent damage to your opponent and maybe get a little cheeky bit of cash while you're at it. So always worth buying early on for not much money. Next up, let me introduce you to Miros. Miros the Guild Mage. Look at him. You know, I've just raved about how good 3 coins are. I am about to go back on that slightly. Miros gives you 3 coins. Great. He's also a guard of 3, so in theory he has the potential to stay up and give you a lot of money over a number of rounds. He also does 4 points of damage if you have Synergy. However, because he's such a low guard, has such low defense, he is so easy to destroy even early game, so it's very, very rare for him to be up for any number of goes. And also he's worth 5, and if you compare it to the other 3 cards, for example Bribe, or even a card I'm going to get to later which is Influence, he's not any better than them. Because Bribe gives you the utility, and we'll go through Influence later, which gives you the ability to sacrifice it so it keeps your hand slim when you need it to be. And because of that, Miros, if you weren't so expensive, 5, come on, maybe you'd be better, but you cost a lot and I'll end up with you late game when I don't actually need the money and you're just meh. I'm sorry, I know I have friends out there who love Miros the Guild Mage. And literally when I said to one of my friends I was doing this video, she was like, you're going to be talking about Miros. But you disappoint me, Miros. I'm sorry. Next up, we have the almost equivalent of Miros in terms of money. So he costs 5 to buy, but this is Parov. And Parov does 3 points of damage. I always think he'll do more, but he doesn't, which is fine. He's a guard of 5, so stronger than our friend Miros here. And also, if you get Synergy, he's got that draw function, which makes him extremely reliable, and he is going in the reliable locked column. So next up we have a card that costs 1, which is Profit. Profit gives you 2 coins immediately, which is always nice. Quite similar to taxation there, and also deals 4 points of damage if you've got that Synergy. And because there's 3 of these cards, 3 Profits can end up dealing 12 points of damage, which did happen recently when I got 3 Profits in a row. And because they're so cheap, it's just really worth getting early on, especially if you're hoping to have like a more blue themed deck. And I would just always recommend buying decent money cards early on, which have a useful synergic effect. So now is the first card, which is going to go into God tier, which doesn't cost 8. And this is Rake, the Assassin. So he is a card of 7, does damage of 4, but he lets you stun anything without needing any synergy, which basically means he can get through any tough champion in the game. And he himself is a champion of 7, so not that many champions or cards can do enough damage to get through him on his own, which makes him so powerful. Because of the fact he is so hard to get through and the fact he can destroy other guards, he is up there on God tier as only a 7 card. Next up, we have Rasmus the Smuggler. He costs 4 to buy, he gives you 2 coins per turn, and if you have synergy, he's got quite a nice aspect that you can take any card from your discard pile and put it on top of your deck, which gives you, a little bit of flexibility to play around, plan what cards you're going to get and when. However, he is a champion of 5, which from early on, like if you get a card like Intimidation, he's pretty easy to get through, and because of that, although it's nice to have that extra money on that field and that utility, again, he needs to be good. Him being good is very dependent on the rest of your hand. And for that reason, he is a meh. So that takes us on to Smush and Groove, as I call it, or Smash and Grab, which is a guaranteed let's move our deck around card. Smash and Grab does 6 points of damage, which is a very good quantity of damage to deal with a fair amount of other players' cards, or just, give someone a direct hit to them directly. However, it also lets you take any card from your discard pile and put it on top of your deck. It's fantastic until you get him at the start of a go when you have no cards in your discard pile and for whatever reason you can't buy any cards. So that makes him less useful. So I would say he is a good reliable card with his damage. His extra aspect is mostly useful unless of course you get it at a bad time. And him being 6 to buy also feels reasonable. So he's again going in my reliable lot. So next up we have the little Street Thug, and the Street Thug costs 3 to buy, so not too expensive. He does 1 point of damage. He gives you 1 coin, or you can use him for 2 points of damage, and he is a champion of 4. This card is fine. I remember we used to be really horrible about Street Thugs, and then we taught my friend Hero Realms and he annihilated us with 2 Street Thugs. I think it was because Rob and I were just really targeting each other and letting our friend, off the hook a little bit, but he still killed us with Street Thugs. So they're not as bad as I thought, and with a good blue deck, they are great in that regard to give you all those fun synergic effects. And the kind of possibility of 2 damage can be really nice early on to just kind of tip your amount of damage you're doing to be able to get through others' champions. So he is a fine card, and if you have multiple of them, that's quite fun. I always get confused whether this is the Death Cultist or Cult Priest. I think these are the Cult Priests. No, the Death Cultists. Crumbs. Or is it a Cult Priest? This is either a Death Cultist or a Cult Priest. It costs 3 to buy, and when I look at him compared to Street Thug, you see initially very similar, 1 coin or 2 points of damage. Cool. However, if you get synergy, suddenly this guy is doing an additional 4 points of damage, which is pretty decent. 6 points of damage just from 1 card is good, and I think he's quite a bit better than these cards down here. He's also a champion, he's going to stay. And I surprisingly really like the Cult Priests just because of that synergic, output. Saying that, is he really reliable? Because he needs to rely on other cards to be good. So, changing my tune a little bit, I'm going to say he's one of the better cards, and if you have a good red hand, I would always definitely buy one of these Cult Priest Death Cultists. One of them. Which means I might as well do the other Death Cultist or Cult Priest. Why can't I remember? This guy is worth 2. He is a guard of 3. He does 2 points of damage. He's fine. Next up, we have one of those rare cards that does 7 damage directly, which is going to help you annihilate those really tricky champions and guards such as Master Rake and Torgon and Grak, the Storm Giant. Because actually there's not many cards that allow you to do that much damage in one go. And the thing I love about Dark Energy is not only does she do 7 points of damage, but she allows you to draw a card if you have synergy, and she only costs 4. Like, that's fantastic. She's probably quite equivalent to Hit Job, and for that I am going to put her in the Game Changer tier. And I'm actually going to go to Rayla Endweaver next, who I think partners really well with Dark Energy. Rayla Endweaver is a champion, I think quite low defense, it's a 3 or 4, and she also costs 4 to buy, but if you have synergy, you get a draw. So getting these two together is fantastic. Because she only does 3 points of damage, and again, she requires that synergic effect to be really effective, I'm going to put her as a reliable lot, but I love having those combo of those two cards. It's just so much fun when you're suddenly dishing out a guaranteed 10 points of damage and drawing 2 extra cards. Like, you can't not like that. Next up is a card I'm very unsure about. So this is one of the cards which is 3 coins, and it guarantees you sacrificing a card, which is probably one of the most powerful abilities in the game, because through sacrificing you're slimming your deck, you're making it more powerful, you are getting rid of those loose links which are stopping you from winning. And she gives you that immediately. She gives you 3 coins, and if you've got synergy you also do 6 points of damage, which is quite a whack. She does cost 5, so she's more than Dark Energy. She's not doing as much damage, but she is giving that sacrifice, and she is giving you those nice coins to be able to buy more expensive things. But but would I buy all of these over her? Probably yes. I'm going to put her as very reliable, and I think the only reason is because that damage isn't guaranteed, and late game, if you've got her, yes, she lets you keep on discarding, which is really nice, but the 3 coins becomes less useful as you go on. Yeah, it's debatable. That's a hard one. Next up, I have seen described as the best card in the game, and that is Death Touch. This cheeky little card is only worth 1 coin. 1 coin! You are guaranteed to buy this first go. However, it is an immediate sacrifice. From the beginning, this allows you to start trimming your deck for so little. And yes, it does 2 points of damage. Yes, it does another 2 points of damage if you've got synergy, but that's kind of not the point, because the point is, from the beginning, you're getting this card. From the beginning, you're guaranteed sacrifice. From the beginning, you're getting the best power of this game. That one card is going in God tier, next to the dragons, next to the firebombs. This cheeky little death cult priest is, with his Death Touch, is slaying. I think I've never used that phrase in my life. I've been watching too much internet. Yeah. So next up we have Influence, and Influence is the 3 money card that we should talk about a lot, because this is the best 3 money card in the game, because it only costs 2, so you're making money from buying it, and you can sacrifice it. If you get to a point where you just don't want a deck focused on money, you want a deck focused on damage because you're about to destroy your opponent, or you just need to get them down super quickly because they're about to destroy you, you can sacrifice this card from the game. So you get the chance to buy those expensive cards, and then you just get rid of it when its time is over. And because of that, this card is most definitely a game changer. So next up we have Krythos, Master Vampire, sitting on his throne, and this guy costs 7, so quite pricey. He is a champion of 6, so a little tough to get through, but not the hardest out there. And he does 3 points of damage, but if you sacrifice a card, he does an additional 3 points of damage, and because he's a relatively high champion, he's also just early on. If you somehow get this guy early on, you can end up sacrificing a lot of cards in your hand, allowing you to do extra damage, plus, you know, slimming that hand down without your opponent being able to kill him, which just makes him such a great game-changing card. Similar to him, there is Lys the Unseen. He costs 5, so a little bit cheaper than Krythos there. And he is only a guard of 5, so a little easier to get through. And he does 2 damage, you sacrifice, you get another 2 points of damage. So both these cards work in a very similar way and both very effective, especially early game. However, it can get to a point later game when maybe you don't actually have anything you want to sacrifice, in which case these cards become less effective because you don't get as much damage out of them. 3 versus 6, 2 versus 4, like, we'll do the maths, it's not as good. And so although getting these early mid-game, phenomenal, later game they can be a bit of a pain, and you might actually have to end up buying some not as good cards in order to get the damage you need from them. Another card I want to mention, well, I'm obviously going to mention, is Life Train. And this one I was umming and ahhing where to put it. So this is also 6 gold to buy. Is Lys 6? I'm really sorry, Lys is 6. Life Train is also 6 to buy. He guarantees you a sacrifice. He does a whopping 8 points of damage. And if you have synergy, he lets you draw. And sometimes when these two are on the field, I'm not sure which one to go for, because early game, if you get Lys, your opponents are going to struggle like getting through Lys, and therefore it means you can sacrifice really quickly. But later game, that damage, that ability to draw, especially if you have a small deck, is phenomenal. And I was very tempted to put this in God tier, but I actually think I'm just going to keep it with the game changes, because sometimes I will choose Lys the Unseen over Life Drain. Just very much depends on where in the game I'm at, but they're both phenomenal cards. Next we have the Rot, and the Rot is very similar to Death Touch in terms of it's not that expensive. It only costs 3 coins. It does 3 points of damage and lets you sacrifice, and with synergy an additional 4 points of damage. However, I'm not going to put it in God tier because you aren't guaranteed to get it first go, and there are other cards first go I would choose over this, but I always think it's still really good to buy, and it's a cheap sacrificing card that's good to get when you can. So any card that basically sacrifices is almost definitely, in my mind, a game changer. Which takes us on to Tyrannor, which right now might be one of the favourite cards in the game, because yes, it only does 4 points of damage. Yes, it is only a guard of 6. I mean, hit job can get through that easily, but it lets you sacrifice 2 cards in one go, and if you have synergy, you get to draw another card. If you have Tyrannor on the field for 2 turns, you have just got rid of almost nearly half of your starting deck. That is insane. You will be in such a powerful position. Yes, he costs 8, so it's very unlikely for you to get him early game, but it does happen. And yes, I am terrified when that happens, and I am not the one with him in my hand. He is going out there. So that brings us to the final red in the original Hero Realms pack, and that is Varric the Necromancer. Varric the Necromancer costs 5. He is a champion of 3, so it's very easy to get through. But the nice thing about him being a champion is if you've got other guards on the field, your opponent has to kill the guards before they can kill the champion, which makes his effect even cooler because he very much is bringing back your champions from the dead. Varric allows you to put a champion from your discard pile on top of your deck, and then if you have synergy, you can draw it. Beautiful. So although he is a small champion, he is still really effective. I am going to put him in Reliable Lot rather than Game Changer, because this relies on you having champions and a red deck to be useful. You can sometimes get him too early on and literally do nothing with him, and then he's just basically a nothing card. So he does have that like needing champions, needing preferably other reds, but I think he is a really great card to have. And imagine if you could just like keep on cycling through Lys or Krythos, how annoying that would be for your opponent. So last up we have green. So we're going to start with a money card. If you remember Rasmus the Smuggler, Brolin is very similar. So Brolin is also a card of 5. She gives you 2 coins guaranteed, and if you have synergy, she makes your opponent discard a card, which is green's kind of best ability. The thing about her compared to Rasmus is she is a champion of 6 rather than 5, which does make a significant difference early game. She's a lot harder to kill, and because of that, I'm putting her in the reliable lot. So next up we have Kron the Barbarian. Kron costs 6 to buy, which is reasonable. He does a damage of 5 per go, being a champion of 6. And he also lets you draw a card if you've got synergy, which is pretty decent. He is a nice card to have, especially if you've got a heavily green deck, and I would always happily buy him. But I wouldn't say he's anything special. I'm sorry, Kron. Similarly, you have Direwolf, which is a guard of 5, does 4 points of damage plus an additional 3 with synergy, and he costs 5. Again, nice card to have, reliable, fairly easy to get through early game, but I just think he's also quite cute, even though he is growling. Now takes us to a card which we have slightly homebrewed. Elven Curse does 6 points of damage, plus makes your opponent discard a card, and if you have synergy, he does another 3 points of damage. That is 9 points of damage in one go, plus a discard card, possibly. It costs 3 coins. That is insane. That is so much damage, and it's 3 coins. So we've homebrewed it to 4 coins. We feel that balances the game better and is a lot more effective. So that is what I would recommend if you play this game. Let me know if you agree that you think it's overpowered. But it is a insanely good and very frustrating card. And I'm going to put it in a game changer just because of the amount of horrible damage it can do to you. And you can have multiple Elven Curses, and it's just horrible. And if you compare it, for example, to Wolf Form, which costs 5 to buy, thinking that Elven Curse is supposed to cost 3, Wolf Form does 8 points of damage and makes you discard a card. Okay, very similar, but it doesn't do that extra damage if you've got synergy. And its special thing is you can sacrifice it from the game to make someone discard an additional card, which is a really effective thing, but that means you could lose it. So, it's not that dissimilar from how good it is compared to Elven Curse. They're both fantastic cards, but the cost difference is very noticeable, and that's why we've increased Elven Curse. And both of them are fantastic. Buy those cards, they're great to have, they're game changers. Next up, we have one of the smaller greens, which is one of the money ones. An Elven Gift costs 2 coins and lets you draw a card it lets you draw a card into your hand and then choose a card to discard. So you'll end up with the same number of cards. You can just be a little bit more flexible about which ones you choose to have. And if you have synergy, you get 4 points of damage. Because of its ability to kind of get through and cycle through your deck quicker, it's a super reliable and useful card. So this brings us on to Grak the Storm Giant, who is the final 8 of the game. But he's not as good as the others, and let me explain. So on the surface, sounds awesome, right? So Grak is a guard of 7, which is highest guard in the game. He does 6 points of damage, pretty hefty, eh? And he allows you to draw and discard a card, and if you've got synergy, do that twice, so cycle through the deck. However, there are a number of 7 cards, for example, Rake, that can very easily counter him and also be on the field. And it almost feels like, because the thing is, he in turn can't deal with Rake. So we've got a 7 card, which is a perfect counter to him. And all the other cards have something else good going for them. Like, you draw a card, you're not just like having to choose between them, or you're sacrificing, or you're doing such a ton of damage and also drawing and also stunning. And he just doesn't feel as good. Like, don't get me wrong, great card to have, but he can just be countered by too many of the less good cards. It doesn't require a combination of things to destroy him. And for example, Torgon, which is worth a 7, is also a guard of 7, does 4 points of damage, so not quite as much, but also makes a player sacrifice a card. Sorry, makes a player discard a card in their hand. So he is actually comparable to Grat, and sometimes I'm like, which one do I want? Do I want to be able to cycle through my hand quicker, or do I want to be a real pain in the ass for my opponent and make them discard a hand, potentially multiple goes in a row? So yeah, Torgon is also a game changer. Love that card. Next, we're going to bring up Nature's Bounty, which is the highest money card in the game. Nature's Bounty costs 4, but gives you 4. And if you've got Synergy, you get to make your opponent discard a card. And may I add, if you've decided you've had enough, you can get rid of her and deal 4 points of damage to your opponent. You can sacrifice her. So she's very much like an advanced influence, and I'm going to put her next to it as well. 4 more cards to get through. First of all, we've got Little Orc Grunt, who costs 3 to buy. He is a guard of 3, he does 2 points of damage, and if you've got Synergy, he lets you draw a card, which is really nice. And I always quite like Orc Grunts. I like their draw aspect if you do have that Synergy. And if you've got a few of them, although they are really easy to get through, I think they just work really well in the decks I've played previously. They also go fairly well with Wolf Form. So Wolf Form does 2 points of damage and then an extra point of damage for every green you've got. And she also is a champion, I think, of 4. She works really well when you've got a big green deck, but not so much if you don't. And because she is a smaller champion as well, she doesn't really, she's quite easy to destroy. Sometimes she is so reliable on, that very green focused deck. And because of that, her on her own is a little bit meh. So she is going there. Next up, we have Rampage. So Rampage is quite a fun card. It costs 6. You draw 6. No, you don't. That would be insane. Costs 6, does 6 points of damage, and allows you to draw 2 cards and then choose from your hand which 2 you're going to get rid of. Allows you to cycle through your deck really, really quickly, which especially early game, if you manage to get this card, which is possible because it's a 6, it can really shift the tables. So it is kind of between reliable and game changer. And if I compare Rampage to all the other cards up here, I'm probably, for its money, less likely to buy Rampage, but it is super reliable in terms of getting you through your pack. But it's definitely probably one of the 6s, a bit like Borg, that I'm definitely less drawn to. So I'm actually going to put Rampage there. Now let's take us to Spark. Spark only costs 1, does 3 points of damage and makes an opponent discard a card plus an extra 2 damage. Because Spark is so cheap and because it makes your opponent discard a card, you are going to buy this card at any point through the game and it can be effective even if you don't have a green deck. I have previously pulled out like 2 Sparks and an Elven Curse, which has just been awful for my other player. I think I have made my opponent discard 5 cards before. Yeah, it was great. But because of that, just because of how cheap and useful and annoying this card is for your opponent, I am going to put this as a game changer because you're never going to pass up Spark wherever you are. You're never going to, occasionally you do get markets for the bribes and street thugs and you're just like, I don't want any of these. But Spark you would always take. And that is it. Oh my goodness. So most of my cards I put in kind of really interesting to see. So I have no greens in God tier. I have 2 reds, 2 blues and 1 yellow. And then I only have 1 yellow in Wouldn't Touch with a 10-foot pole. Most of the mare cards, interestingly though, although I don't have any green cards in the God tier, I've only got 1 in the mare pile. Most of those have gone into kind of the game changer area. So it seems that there are a fair spread of quite powerful green cards. Just for me, they don't quite reach that sweet spot. But this is really interesting to look through. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know what you thought of it. If you enjoyed it, let me know what you think. Would you agree with my decisions of how I've ranked hero realms? What are your favourite cards? What are your least favourite cards? Which ones will you always buy? Which ones do you think are rubbish? Let me know. There are a few more cards at the bottom. This is an expansion I actually didn't know about and I don't have. So that's quite exciting that there might be some more cards out there for me to use. But the expansion I've got is great. I'll write what it is below. And also I want to add that the campaign, which is a co-op, is also a really fantastic game and I'd really recommend. But I need to go and get some water. Lovely to see you all and have a lovely week, everyone. Stay safe. Bye-bye.